When the Ottomans triumphed in battle, the silence of victory was not peace. It was the sound of chains. The men who resisted were slaughtered, the survivors were enslaved, but the true horror was reserved for their wives. These women were not treated as human beings. They were commodities, property to be cataloged, inspected, and sold. This wasn't chaos. It wasn't random pillage, it was law. Codified, organized, and perfected by the empire's bureaucracy. Historians called them sabaya, the spoils of war, and the Ottomans applied the rule with chilling efficiency. Before we go deeper into this descent into history's darkest corners, hit subscribe so you don't miss the stories most textbooks choose to ignore. The capture. The process began the moment a city fell. Ottoman officials entered like accountants of misery, dividing the population with ruthless precision, men to one side, children to another. And women, stripped of identity and dignity, herded into lines for inspection. Their bodies became ledgers, teeth were examined, skin inspected, age, health, and beauty turned into numbers on paper. Young and striking, sent to Constantinople, older or weaker, condemned to hard labor, unwanted, discarded like waste. A noble woman who once commanded respect could be handled like cattle in the open streets, her body prodded and her value shouted as if she were nothing more than livestock. The march of chains from there began. The long march. Chained together in endless columns, women were forced across the empire's roads for weeks. Hunger and exhaustion cut many down. The weak were left to rot by the roadside. Others were crammed into wagons like sacks of grain, bruised and broken before they even reached the markets. Reaching the destination alive was survival, but survival meant a new nightmare. The markets of misery, Ottoman slave markets, were not hidden in shadows. They were state-regulated, taxed, and monitored by scribes. In Constantinople, Bursa, and Ankara, women were displayed before buyers. Hands inspected their skin, questions measured their fertility. Skills in weaving or cooking were demonstrated like tools at a stall. If a woman failed to impress, her price dropped. Her body was beaten. The humiliation was the point. Women were forced to smile, to show obedience, to act as though they had already accepted their fate. Behind them, scribes recorded it all: name, age, origin, price. Every transaction written into the empire's archives. Misery turned into paperwork. Harem, a gilded cage. The most beautiful captives faced a darker fate. They were taken not to markets, but into the empire's gilded prison, the harem. Forget the myths of luxury, silk, and romance. The harem was not paradise. It was psychological annihilation. Inside Topkapi Palace, thousands of women from across conquered lands were locked away under eunuch guards. Their languages erased, their names stripped, their faith replaced with forced rituals. Refusal meant starvation, whipping, or confinement in dark cells. Obedience meant survival, but survival without identity. Women competed for scraps of influence, knowing favoritism could mean safety, while rejection could mean abuse or death. Some adapted. Some went mad. Others ended their lives in despair. The harem was not a sanctuary. It was a graveyard for the soul. Breaking nobility. For wives of nobles and commanders, the torment was even sharper. They were forced to serve the very men who destroyed their families, made to pour wine for the officers who had killed their husbands. Their degradation was deliberate. It sent a message to every conquered people. If your noblest women can be broken, no one is safe. The womb as a weapon. The cruelty did not stop at enslavement. Captive women were turned into producers for the empire. Any child born of an enslaved mother automatically belonged to the master. Mothers raised children they could never truly call their own, knowing the empire could rip them away at any moment. The womb itself became a tool of conquest, and when religion was added, the chains sank even deeper. Christian women were forced into conversion ceremonies. Refusal meant torture. Acceptance meant permanent erasure. Converted, renamed, and rewritten into Islam, escape became meaningless. They were no longer welcome in their old communities, no longer recognized by their faith, their families, or their culture. Conversion was not salvation. It was a second death. Punishment by spectacle. Some women never made it to market or harem. They were reserved for spectacle. When cities resisted too long, the Ottomans singled out the wives of commanders for public torment, stripped and paraded through streets, branded with hot irons, forced to clean the barracks of their conquerors. Some were locked in cages and left to starve in full view of their people. The empire turned their suffering into performance, a living warning carved into the memory of every conquered community. Generational destruction. This system was not just about one battle or one generation. It was demographic warfare. Entire villages lost their daughters and mothers. Populations warped, communities hollowed. Generations vanished. Survivors, who somehow returned, often found no home waiting for them. Their families rejected them as tainted. Their communities refused to accept them. They were strangers in their own lands, living scars of conquest, fear as a weapon. The cruelty worked because it spread faster than armies. News of women enslaved, paraded, branded, and broken reached neighboring cities long before the Ottoman troops arrived. Some towns surrendered without a fight, opening their gates not because of cannons, but because of whispers. Whispers of what would happen to their wives. This was conquest, not just by sword, but by wombs, children, and humiliation. The legacy, and perhaps the most chilling truth of all, the empire did not see this as crime. It was law. Every act, the branding, the conversion, the enslavement, was legitimized by judges, scribes, and officials. Cruelty was not tolerated. It was celebrated as order, as civilization, as empire. And once the system was proven, it spread. Other states copied it. Other empires borrowed its methods. The wives of defeated warriors were not just victims of one empire. They were the foundation of a legacy of exploitation that outlived them for centuries. But one question remains. What became of the women who disappeared? The ones erased from records, lost to silence, swallowed by the empire's machinery. Their names are gone, their stories unwritten, their lives reduced to numbers in ledgers that still sit in archives today. And perhaps that is the darkest truth of all, that the greatest crime of conquest is not death, but erasure. This is why the story of the Ottoman wives still echoes, not because of how they lived, but because of how completely they were made to disappear. Subscribe for more journeys into the forgotten and the forbidden corners of history.